Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The gun was cold against Julian's temple, but the hand holding it, a hand wearing a platinum wedding band identical to his own, was steady, possessive, and terrifyingly warm. "Touch him again," Damon whispered, his voice a velvet caress that carried the weight of a grave. "And I will dismantle your entire lineage, bone by fragile bone." Julian stopped breathing. He stared at the man standing between him and the chaos of the banquet hall. This wasn't the mild-mannered accountant his stepmother had arranged for him to marry. This was a predator in a bespoke Italian suit. Julian had walked into the wrong private room, proposed to the wrong man, and signed a marriage certificate with the devil himself. And now, as blood pooled on the marble floor from the assassin Damon had just dispatched, Julian realized the most dangerous thing in the room wasn't the gun. It was his husband. Chapter 1. The golden cage. The rain in Seattle didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker, harder to hold on to. Julian Vane stood outside the heavy oak doors of the Obsidian Lounge, clutching a damp leather portfolio to his chest. He was 23, cursed with a face that looked like porcelain and a life that felt like a prison. Inside that portfolio was a contract. A desperation play. His grandfather's will was explicit. Julian Vane receives his trust fund and majority shares of Vane Enterprises only upon marriage. If he remained single by his 24th birthday, which was tomorrow, control would revert permanently to his stepmother, Lady Catherine. Catherine had arranged a match for him, a man named Silas. Julian had never met him, but he knew the type of men Catherine associated with: weak, pliable, and greedy. If Julian married Silas, Catherine would rule through the husband. Julian would remain a puppet. But Julian had a plan. He would walk in, offer Silas a contract, a 50-50 split of the money in exchange for a marriage in name only, and total autonomy from Catherine. It was a bribe, a buyout. He checked his watch. 7 p.m. Room 404. He pushed through the doors, the heavy scent of expensive cologne and old money hitting him instantly. He navigated the dimly lit corridors, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He found the door marked 4 in Roman numerals. He didn't knock. He couldn't afford to hesitate. Julian burst into the room. "Listen to me before you speak," he blurted out, breathless, his eyes squeezed shut for a second to gather his courage. "I know my stepmother sent you. I know you're here to control me. But I have a better offer." He slammed the portfolio onto the low mahogany table and opened his eyes. The room was darker than the hallway. The air was thick, almost suffocating, scented with sandalwood and the metallic tang of something sharp. Sitting on a plush leather sofa, shrouded in shadow, was a man. He was not the doughy, middle-aged Silas that Catherine had described. This man was a sculpture of jagged lines and dark intent. He held a crystal tumbler of amber liquid in one large, veined hand. His legs were crossed, his suit blacker than the shadows clinging to the corners of the room. His hair was the color of midnight, swept back from a forehead that housed eyes of piercing, glacial blue. Those eyes locked onto Julian. They didn't blink. They devoured. "A better offer," the man repeated. His voice was a low rumble, vibrating through the floorboards and straight into the soles of Julian's shoes. It wasn't the voice of a businessman. It was the voice of a king on a throne of skulls. Julian's survival instincts screamed at him to run. This man was dangerous. The aura radiating off him was heavy, suffocating, like the pressure before a thunderstorm. But desperation was a powerful drug. $50 million, Julian said, his voice trembling but his chin held high. "I marry you. You get half my inheritance. In exchange, you help me destroy Catherine's hold on the company, and we divorce in 2 years. No intimacy. No interference. Just business." The man in the shadows tilted his head. A slow, terrifying smirk curled the corner of his lip. He set the glass down. "You want to buy me for $50 million? It's a lot of money," Julian stammered, suddenly feeling very small. "It is pocket change," the man murmured, standing up. He towered over Julian, easily 6'3" of lean, coiled muscle. He stepped into the light. A scar ran through his left eyebrow, marring perfection with brutality. "But I find myself in need of a distraction." The man picked up the contract, scanning it with eyes that seemed to read the subtext of the universe. My lawyers are outside. We can have the papers drawn and filed within the hour. Julian blinked. You accept? You're Silas. The man's smile widened, showing teeth that were too white, too sharp. For tonight, little bird, I can be whoever you need me to be. He pulled a fountain pen from his jacket pocket, a heavy, black metal thing that looked like a weapon, and signed the document with a flourish. Damon Cross. Julian frowned at the signature. That doesn't say Silas. Silas was the man my guards escorted out of the building 10 minutes ago because he was breathing my air, Damon said smoothly, closing the folder. He stepped close to Julian, his hand reaching out to tilt Julian's chin up. His thumb brushed over Julian's lower lip, a touch that was both electric and possessive. I am Damon Cross. And you, Julian, just sold your soul. Julian knew the name. Everyone in the city knew the name. Damon Cross, the CEO of Cross Global, the shadow ruler of the port, the man the police didn't dare investigate. Julian's legs gave out. Damon caught him, an arm like an iron band snapping around his waist. Careful, husband, Damon whispered against his ear. We have a wedding to attend. Chapter 2. The lion's den. The hour that followed was a blur of high-speed luxury cars. A terrified judge pulled out of bed, and the cold weight of a ring sliding onto Julian's finger. It was a rush, a fever dream. Julian felt like he was floating, detached from reality. He had wanted a shield against his stepmother. Instead, he had strapped himself to a nuclear warhead. Why? Why would Damon Cross, a man who could own nations, agree to this farce? Julian didn't have time to ask. The black limousine was already pulling through the wrought iron gates of the Vane estate. The engagement party, which was supposed to be his introduction to Silas, was in full swing. My stepmother is going to kill me, Julian whispered, staring at the lights of the mansion. She can try, Damon said, checking the cuffs of his shirt. He looked bored. But she will find that I am remarkably hard to kill. The car stopped. The chauffeur opened the door. Damon stepped out first, the cameras flashing instantly. He turned and extended a hand to Julian. It was a command, not an offer. Julian took it. The heat of Damon's palm was grounding. They walked up the grand staircase, a unified front of dark elegance and pale anxiety. The doors swung open. The ballroom fell silent. Lady Catherine Vane stood at the top of the room, holding a champagne flute. She was a beautiful woman, sharp and cold like a diamond. Beside her stood a man, sweaty, balding, looking confused. That must have been the real Silas, allowed back in after Damon's departure. Catherine's eyes landed on Julian. She smiled, a triumphant, predatory thing. Julian, darling, you're late. And Silas has been waiting. Her gaze drifted to the man holding Julian's hand. The glass fell from her hand. It shattered on the floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. Catherine froze. Her face drained of all color, leaving her looking like a wax figure. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She took a stumbling step back, her composure incinerated in a single second. That, she choked out, her voice trembling so hard it cracked. That is not the man I chose. The room erupted in whispers. Damon squeezed Julian's hand, pulling him flush against his side. He looked at Catherine with the amusement of a wolf watching a rabbit try to limp away. No, Damon announced, his voice projecting effortlessly to the back of the hall. I am not the man you chose, Lady Catherine. I am the man who chose him. He held up their joined hands, the rings glinting under the chandelier. I am Damon Cross. And Julian is my husband. The fear in the room was palpable. It had a taste, copper and sweat. Men who were powerful CEOs lowered their eyes. Women clutched their pearls. Damon Cross was not a celebrity. He was a catastrophe. Catherine looked like she was about to faint. This is a mistake. Julian, what have you done? He secured his legacy, Damon answered for him, and acquired a very possessive protector. Damon leaned down, brushing his lips against Julian's temple in a show of intimacy that made Julian shiver. Smile, my love. Your mother looks like she's seen a ghost. Chapter 3. The Spider and the Fly. The ride to Damon's penthouse was silent. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold dread. Julian sat as far away from Damon as the limousine allowed. Why? Julian asked finally. Why did you do it? You don't need my money. You don't need a husband. Damon turned his head, watching the city lights blur by. The Cross Syndicate has enemies, Julian. Currently, the Triad is looking for a weakness. They abide by the old laws. No spouses, no children. By marrying you, I have just made myself untouchable for the next 6 months of negotiations. Julian felt a chill. I'm a shield. A loophole. You are a convenience, Damon corrected coldly. Do not mistake my amusement for affection. You walked into my room and offered yourself. I simply accepted. The car stopped at a private underground entrance. However, Damon continued, his voice dropping an octave, you are now a cross. And I take care of my possessions. They took the elevator to the penthouse. It was a fortress of glass and steel, overlooking the entire city. Cold. Impersonal. You will sleep in the guest wing, Damon said, loosening his tie. Do not enter my office. Do not leave the building without my security detail. And do not speak to your stepmother. I can't just cut her off, Julian argued, finding a spark of defiance. She holds the board of directors. Damon stopped. He turned slowly. The air in the room grew heavy again. He walked toward Julian, forcing him to back up until his spine hit the cold glass of the window. Damon placed a hand on the glass next to Julian's head, boxing him in. You think you are playing a corporate game, Damon murmured, his face inches from Julian's. You are not. You are in the Shark Tank now. Catherine isn't just a greedy stepmother. She has been laundering money for the Bratva for 10 years. That is why she wanted you to marry Silas. Silas is their broker. Julian's eyes widened. What? You were the sacrificial lamb, Damon whispered. She was going to frame you for the embezzlement and have you incarcerated once the inheritance transferred. You would have rotted in a cell while she spent your fortune. Julian felt sick. The betrayal stung, but the proximity of Damon was overwhelming. How? How do you know? I know everything, Damon said. He pulled back, the coldness returning to his eyes. Go to sleep, Julian. Tomorrow, the war begins. Chapter 4, Bleeding Hearts. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Julian expected cruelty from Damon. He expected the monster the tabloids wrote about. What he got was confusing. Damon was distant, yes. But he was also meticulous. He revamped Julian's wardrobe. He fired the corrupt board members of Vane Enterprises one by one, replacing them with terrifyingly competent loyalists. He ate dinner with Julian every night, demanding conversation about art, literature, and politics. Slowly, the fear began to morph. Julian watched Damon work, the ruthless efficiency, the commanding presence. He saw the way Damon's staff looked at him with reverence, not just fear. One rainy Tuesday, Julian was working in the library when Damon entered, looking exhausted. He had a bruise on his jaw and a slight limp. Without thinking, Julian stood up. You're hurt. It's nothing, Damon grunted, heading for the liquor cabinet. Sit down, Julian ordered. Damon paused. He looked at Julian, surprised by the tone. To Julian's shock, the king of the underworld sat. Julian fetched the first aid kit. He knelt between Damon's legs, dabbing antiseptic on the cut along Damon's jawline. Damon watched him, his blue eyes unreadable. Why do you care? Damon asked quietly. I am using you. I'm using you too, Julian countered, his hands steady despite his racing heart. That's the deal, isn't it? Damon caught Julian's hand. He pressed his lips to Julian's palm, a slow, deliberate kiss that sent fire through Julian's veins. The deal is changing, Damon murmured. You were supposed to be a shield, Julian. But you are becoming a weakness. I find myself wanting to keep you. The moment was shattered by the sound of glass breaking downstairs. Gunfire erupted. Damon moved instantly. He shoved Julian behind the heavy oak desk, pulling a gun from the small of his back. Stay down. Men in tactical gear stormed the library. Catherine's last gambit. The Bratva mercenaries. Damon was a blur of violence. He moved with lethal grace, firing with precision. But there were too many of them. One mercenary flanked them, aiming at Damon's exposed back. Damon, Julian screamed. He threw a heavy crystal decanter, smashing it into the gunman's face. The man staggered, his shot going wide. Damon spun, putting 2 bullets in the man's chest. Silence fell. Damon stood amidst the carnage, chest heaving. He turned to Julian, who was shaking, white as a sheet. Damon dropped the gun and crossed the room in 2 strides. He hauled Julian up, crushing him into a hug that threatened to break ribs. He buried his face in Julian's neck, inhaling deeply. "You foolish, brave idiot," Damon growled against his skin. "You saved me. You're my husband," Julian whispered, clutching Damon's bloodstained suit. "I protect my assets." Damon pulled back, looking at Julian with a new intensity. The ice in his eyes had melted, replaced by a scorching blue fire. "You are not an asset," Damon said roughly. "You are mine, and I am going to burn the world for daring to touch you." Chapter 5. The Queen's rise. The fallout was swift. Damon didn't just defeat Catherine, he obliterated her. Evidence of her laundering was leaked to the FBI. Her accounts were frozen. The Bratva backed off, terrified of sparking a full-scale war with the Cross Syndicate. Julian stood on the balcony of the penthouse, watching the city below. He was the owner of Vane Enterprises now, in truth and in law. He was free. The glass door slid open. Damon stepped out, wrapping his arms around Julian's waist from behind, resting his chin on Julian's shoulder. "The papers are ready," Damon said quietly. Julian stiffened. "What papers?" "The annulment," Damon said. "The threat is gone. You have your company. You don't need the monster anymore." Julian turned in his arms. He looked at the man who had terrified him, protected him, and empowered him. He saw the vulnerability hidden deep in those glacial eyes, the fear that he was too dark for Julian's light. Julian reached up, tracing the scar on Damon's eyebrow. "I don't recall asking for an annulment," Julian said softly. Damon searched his face. "Julian, I am not a good man. I deal in death and shadows. You belong in the light." "Then drag me into the dark," Julian challenged. "I mistook you for my blind date, Damon. But I didn't mistake my feelings. You chose me. Now, I'm choosing you." Damon let out a ragged breath, as if he had been holding it for months. He kissed Julian then, not a performance for the cameras, not a dominance play, but a kiss of desperate, consuming devotion. "So be it," Damon whispered against his lips. "Long live the Queen." And that is how the viper tamed the wolf. If you enjoyed seeing Julian take control of his destiny, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a husband who hid his criminal empire from you if he protected you with his life? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then.